The winter wind howled through the streets of Nevada City, California, cutting through Daisy Fairmont's worn coat like a blade through butter, and she pressed her cheek against the warm neck of her Palomino mare one last time before she would have to let her go forever. It was December of 1873, and the unseasonably brutal cold had already claimed 3 lives in the small mining town nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Daisy had burned through the last of her firewood 2 days ago, and the mercantile owner had refused her any more credit. Her father had died in a mining accident 6 months prior, leaving her with nothing but debts, a small cabin that leaked cold air through every crack, and Honey, the golden mare he had given her on her 18th birthday 3 years ago. She had tried everything else first. She had taken in mending, but her fingers were so cold they could barely hold a needle. She had offered to clean houses, but most families were struggling themselves and could not afford help. She had even considered leaving Nevada City entirely, but she had no money for stage fare and nowhere to go. Her mother had died when she was a child, and her father had been her only family. Now, standing in front of the livery stable with Honey's lead rope clutched in her frozen fingers, Daisy felt the last piece of her heart preparing to break. The mare had been her companion through everything. They had ridden through the Golden Hills in spring, forded creeks in summer, and watched the aspens turn gold in autumn. Honey knew her moods, would nuzzle her shoulder when she cried, and always nickered softly when Daisy approached her stall. "I am so sorry, girl," Daisy whispered, her voice catching. "I do not want to do this, but if I do not sell you, we will both freeze. At least this way one of us survives." The mare's dark eyes seemed to understand, and she pressed her soft nose against Daisy's cheek, blowing warm air that made Daisy's tears flow faster. Samuel Wright, the livery owner, had promised to find Honey a good home. He was a decent man, as far as Daisy knew, and he had given her an extra week before requiring payment for the mare's board. But that week had run out, and Daisy had no choice. She led Honey into the stable, where Samuel waited with a sympathetic expression on his weathered face. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes that had seen too much hardship. "I am sorry it has come to this, Miss Fairmont," he said quietly. "Your father was a good man. He would not want you suffering like this." "My father would not want me selling Honey either," Daisy replied, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "But I do not see another way." "I will get you the best price I can," Samuel promised. "There is a man who has been looking at her all week. Name is Vincent Sterling. He runs a big cattle operation about 15 miles west of here. He has been in town buying supplies and horses. He seems like a fair fellow, pays his bills on time, treats animals well from what I have seen." Daisy nodded numbly. She did not care about the details. All she knew was that in a few minutes, Honey would belong to someone else, and she would take the money and buy firewood and food and try to survive another week, another month, until spring came and maybe she could find better work. "Would you like to stay while I show her to him?" Samuel asked gently. "No," Daisy said quickly. She could not bear to watch a stranger inspect her beloved horse like merchandise. "Just, please make sure whoever buys her will treat her kindly. I give you my word." Daisy pressed her face into Honey's mane one last time, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and hay and home. Then she forced herself to step back, to release the lead rope, to turn and walk away before she changed her mind. The cold air hit her face as she stepped back outside, and she realized her cheeks were wet with tears that were already starting to freeze. She pulled her thin coat tighter and hurried back toward her cabin, not wanting to be anywhere near the livery when the transaction took place. Her cabin sat on the edge of town, a small structure her father had built when he first came to Nevada City during the gold rush of 1849. He had never struck it rich, but he had made enough to get by, and he had always told Daisy that honest work was worth more than stolen gold. She had believed him then. Now, she was not so sure. Honest work had not saved him from a cave-in, and it had not kept her warm through this brutal winter. Inside, the cabin was barely warmer than the air outside. Daisy could see her breath forming clouds. She wrapped herself in every blanket she owned and sat on her narrow bed, staring at the cold fireplace and waiting for the numbness to set in. An hour later, a knock on her door startled her from her miserable thoughts. She rose stiffly, her joints already aching from the cold, and opened the door to find Samuel standing there with a concerned expression. "He bought her," Samuel said without preamble, holding out a small leather pouch. "Paid more than I asked, actually. Said she was the finest mare he had seen in years." Daisy took the pouch with shaking hands. It was heavier than she had expected. She opened it and stared at the gold coins inside. It was more money than she had seen in months. "This is too much," she whispered. "I told him what you were asking, and he said it was not enough for a horse of that quality. He insisted on paying fair value." Samuel hesitated, then added, "He asked about you." Daisy looked up sharply. "About me? He saw you leaving and asked why you were crying." "I told him you were selling the horse because of hard times, that you had lost your father and were struggling to make it through winter." Samuel shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "He asked where you lived." A chill ran through Daisy that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Why would he ask that?" "I do not know, Miss Fairmont, but he did not seem to mean any harm. He is waiting outside, actually. Said he would like to speak with you if you are willing." Daisy's first instinct was to refuse. She did not want to meet the man who had bought honey, did not want to see a stranger leading her horse away. But something in Samuel's expression made her pause. "Did he say what he wanted to speak about?" "No, miss. But like I said, he seems like a decent fellow. I would not have brought him here if I thought otherwise." Daisy looked down at the coins in her hand, then at the cold fireplace, then back at Samuel. She had nothing left to lose. "Very well. He may come in." Samuel nodded and stepped aside. A moment later, a man appeared in the doorway, and despite her grief and exhaustion, Daisy found herself staring. Vincent Sterling was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that brushed his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat, sturdy boots, and a black hat that he removed as soon as he saw her. "Miss Fairmont," he said, and his voice was deep and surprisingly gentle. "I apologize for intruding. My name is Vincent Sterling." "Mr. Wright told me," Daisy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She was acutely aware of how she must look, with her red-rimmed eyes and threadbare dress. "Did you wish to discuss the horse, in a manner of speaking?" Vincent glanced at Samuel, who took the hint and excused himself, pulling the door closed behind him. Vincent remained standing just inside the threshold, not presuming to come any farther without invitation. "I understand you sold your mare out of necessity, not choice." Daisy stiffened. "My reasons are my own business, Mr. Sterling. Of course they are. I meant no offense." He turned his hat in his hands, and Daisy noticed they were work-roughened, the hands of a man who did not shy from hard labor. "I wanted to make you a proposition if you would hear it. A proposition." Daisy's guard went up immediately. She had heard stories about men who took advantage of desperate women. Vincent must have seen the change in her expression, because he held up one hand quickly. "Nothing improper, I assure you. It is just that I find myself in need of help at my ranch, and Mr. Wright mentioned you are in need of work." "What kind of help?" Daisy asked warily. "Cooking, mostly. Some cleaning. I have a ranch hand, Tom, who does most of the outdoor work, but neither of us can cook worth a damn. We have been living on burnt beans and tough bacon for months." He smiled slightly, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "I am willing to pay fair wages plus room and board. You would have your own quarters, separate from the main house. Everything proper and respectable." Daisy stared at him, trying to understand what he was really offering. "You want to hire me as a cook and housekeeper, yes. The work would not be easy, but it would be steady, and you would be warm and fed through the winter." He paused, then added quietly, "And your horse would be there. You could see her every day, ride her when your work is done, if you wished." The words hit Daisy like a physical blow. She had thought she would never see Honey again, had been preparing herself for that loss. Now this stranger was offering her not just employment, but the chance to remain with her beloved mare. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "You do not know me. I could be a terrible cook. I could rob you blind." Vincent met her eyes steadily. "Mr. Wright spoke well of your character and your father's. That is recommendation enough for me. As for your cooking, it can hardly be worse than mine." His expression grew more serious. "I know what it is to lose everything, Miss Fairmont. I know what it is to have to make impossible choices. If I can help ease that burden for someone else, I figure that is worth the risk." Daisy wanted to be suspicious, wanted to find some hidden motive in his offer, but she was so tired, so cold, so desperately lonely and afraid. And the thought of being able to see Honey again, to not lose the last precious thing her father had given her, was almost too much to bear. "I would need to think about it," she said, though her mind was already made up. "Of course. I will be staying at the hotel tonight and leaving tomorrow morning. If you decide to accept, meet me at the livery at first light." He settled his hat back on his head and moved toward the door, then paused. "Regardless of what you decide, please keep the money from the horse sale. Consider it payment for her excellent care." Before Daisy could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood in the middle of her freezing cabin, clutching the pouch of coins, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. A stranger had bought her horse, then offered her employment and the chance to remain with the animal she loved. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But as she looked around her cabin, at the empty fireplace and bare shelves, at the frost forming on the inside of the windows, she knew she could not afford to refuse. She would freeze to death before spring if she stayed here. At least at Vincent Sterling's ranch, she would be warm and fed. And if he proved to be anything other than what he claimed, she would deal with that when it came. The decision was easier than it should have been. That night, Daisy slept fitfully, wrapped in every piece of clothing she owned. She rose before dawn, packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, and made her way through the dark streets to the livery stable. Vincent was already there, standing beside a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies. Honey was tied to the back, along with 2 other horses. When the mare saw Daisy, she whinnied softly, and Daisy felt tears prick her eyes again. "You came," Vincent said, and she heard relief in his voice. Had he really thought she might refuse? "I am not a fool, Mr. Sterling. I know a lifeline when one is offered." "Vincent, please. We will be living on the same property. No need for formality." He took her carpet bag and loaded it into the wagon, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His hand was warm and strong, and Daisy was aware of how small her own felt in his grasp. She settled onto the wooden seat, and Vincent climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "It is about 3 hours to the ranch," he said as they started moving. "The road is decent, but let me know if you get too cold. I brought extra blankets." Daisy nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She kept turning in her seat to look at Honey. hardly able to believe the mare was still with her, that she had not lost everything after all. They rode in silence for a while as the sun rose, painting the winter landscape in shades of gold and pink. The hills around Nevada City were dusted with snow, and ice crystals glittered on the bare branches of the trees. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. "How long have you had your ranch?" Daisy asked finally, feeling the need to break the silence. "About 4 years. I bought the land with money I saved working cattle drives up from Texas. It is not the biggest operation, but it is mine, free and clear." There was pride in his voice, the pride of a man who had built something with his own hands. "We run about 200 head of cattle, plus horses. Tom has been with me from the start. He is a good man, a hard worker. You will like him." "Does he know you are bringing me back as a housekeeper?" "I sent word yesterday. He will have the guest cabin ready for you." Vincent glanced at her. "I meant what I said about everything being proper. The cabin is about 50 yards from the main house. You will have complete privacy." Daisy felt some of her tension ease. "I appreciate that." They fell silent again, but it was a more comfortable silence this time. Daisy found herself studying Vincent from the corner of her eye, trying to understand what kind of man he was. He sat easily on the wagon seat, clearly at home in the outdoors. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a firm jaw. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that suggested an old injury. "May I ask how you got that scar?" she asked before she could stop herself. Vincent's hand went automatically to his eyebrow, and he gave a rueful smile. "Bar fight in Abilene back when I was young and stupid. Some drunk cowboy thought I was cheating at cards. I was not, for the record, but he did not believe me. Broke a bottle over my head before his friends dragged him off. That sounds terrifying. It was mostly embarrassing. I learned my lesson about gambling in rough establishments." He paused, then asked, "May I ask how you ended up in Nevada City? Mr. Wright mentioned your father was a miner, but you do not have the look of someone who grew up in gold country." Daisy was surprised by his perceptiveness. "I was born in Philadelphia. My mother died when I was 7, and my father decided to head west to make a fresh start. We arrived in Nevada City when I was 8, and I have been here ever since." "Do you miss Philadelphia?" "Sometimes. I miss the things I barely remember. My mother's garden, the library. Streets that did not turn to mud every spring." She smiled faintly. "But Nevada City has been my home for most of my life. My father is buried here. I suppose that makes it where I belong." Vincent nodded, understanding in his expression. Home is not always a place. Sometimes it is the people we love, or the memories we carry. The words were surprisingly philosophical for a rancher, and Daisy found herself reassessing him again. He was not what she had expected, though she was not entirely sure what she had expected. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled west. The hills grew gentler, opening into wider valleys. They passed other ranches, cattle grazing in winter pastures, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked peaceful, prosperous, nothing like the desperation Daisy had left behind in Nevada City. "That is the Henderson place," Vincent said, pointing to a large ranch house in the distance. "And that one belongs to the Mitchells. Good neighbors for the most part. They helped me when I first started out, gave me advice on ranching in this area." "You have family nearby?" Daisy asked. Vincent's expression closed slightly. "No. My parents died when I was young. I have a sister somewhere back east, but we lost touch years ago. It is just me and Tom now." Daisy heard the loneliness beneath his words and recognized it because it echoed her own. They were both orphans in their own way, both trying to build something out of the wreckage of loss. "There it is," Vincent said suddenly, and Daisy looked up to see a ranch spreading across the valley before them. It was beautiful. The main house was built of solid timber, with a wide porch and a stone chimney from which smoke was already rising. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Fences marked off various pastures, and Daisy could see cattle scattered across the winter grass, their dark shapes stark against the pale landscape. "Welcome to the Sterling Ranch," Vincent said, and there was no mistaking the pride in his voice. As they drew closer, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He was older than Vincent, probably in his early 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. He smiled when he saw the wagon and raised a hand in greeting. "That is Tom," Vincent said. "Tom Baker. He is a good man, like I said. Lost his wife a few years back and did not want to stay on their farm alone. We have been partners ever since." Vincent pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house, and Tom came over, his smile widening. "Boss, you made good time," he said, then turned his attention to Daisy. "And you must be Miss Fairmont. Vincent said you would be coming to help us out. Welcome." "Thank you," Daisy said, accepting his hand as he helped her down from the wagon. His grip was calloused but gentle, his eyes kind. "I got the guest cabin ready like you asked," Tom said to Vincent. "Aired it out, laid a fire, put fresh linens on the bed. Should be comfortable enough. I appreciate it." Vincent was already unloading the wagon, and Tom moved to help him. "Miss Fairmont, why do not you go inside and warm up? I will bring your things to the cabin in a few minutes." Daisy wanted to help, but her legs were stiff from the cold ride, and the promise of warmth was too tempting to resist. She climbed the porch steps and pushed open the door to the main house. The interior was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor establishment. The main room combined a kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace crackling cheerfully. There was a wooden table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves lined with books, and curtains on the windows. It was simple but clean, the home of someone who took pride in what he had built. Daisy moved closer to the fire, holding out her frozen hands to the warmth. She was still standing there when Vincent came in, carrying her carpet bag. "I will show you to your cabin," he said. "You can get settled, and then if you are not too tired, Tom and I would be grateful for some real food. But there is no rush. Take your time." He led her back outside and across the yard to a small cabin that was almost hidden behind a stand of pine trees. It was smaller than the main house but well built, with its own fireplace and chimney. Inside, it was a single room with a bed, a small table and chair, a chest of drawers, and a fireplace where a fire was already burning. It was simple but infinitely warmer and more comfortable than her cabin in Nevada City had been. "The necessary is out back," Vincent said, setting her bag on the bed. "If you need anything else, just let me know. We eat supper around 6, but again, no pressure if you need to rest today." "I can cook tonight," Daisy said. The thought of having something useful to do was actually appealing. "What do you have for supplies?" Vincent looked relieved. "Whatever you can find in the kitchen. I bought plenty of provisions in town, so there should be enough to work with." After he left, Daisy sat on the bed and looked around her new home. It was hard to believe that just this morning she had been freezing in her cabin in Nevada City, resigned to losing Honey forever. Now she was warm, employed, and her horse was in the stable just a short walk away. She allowed herself 5 minutes to simply sit and absorb the change in her fortunes. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and went to see about cooking her first meal at the Sterling Ranch. The kitchen was indeed well stocked. Vincent had not been exaggerating about the provisions. She found flour, salt, sugar, dried beans, rice, potatoes, onions, bacon, salt pork, coffee, and a variety of canned goods. In the cold cellar, she discovered fresh eggs, butter, and milk. It was more food than she had seen in months. She decided to start with something simple but hearty. She fried bacon until it was crispy, then used the drippings to make gravy. She boiled potatoes and mashed them with butter and milk, made biscuits from scratch, and scrambled eggs. It was plain fare, but it was hot and filling, and she took pride in making it as good as she could. Vincent and Tom came in just as she was setting the table, and the looks on their faces when they saw the food made all her effort worthwhile. "Miss Fairmont, this looks incredible," Tom said, pulling out a chair. "I cannot remember the last time I had a proper meal." "It is just simple cooking," Daisy protested, but she was pleased. "Simple cooking is a miracle when you have been living on burnt bacon," Vincent said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Daisy's cheeks heat. They ate in companionable silence, and Daisy was gratified to see both men go back for seconds, then thirds. She ate sparingly herself, still not quite able to believe there would be more food tomorrow, that she did not need to ration every bite. "This is wonderful," Vincent said finally, pushing back his plate with a satisfied sigh. "If every meal is like this, I am going to have to buy new pants." Tom laughed. "Speak for yourself, boss. I have some growing room left." Daisy smiled at their easy banter. It was clear they were more than employer and employee. They were friends, partners, bound together by shared work and mutual respect. After dinner, Daisy insisted on cleaning up, and the men did not argue. They went back outside to finish the evening chores, and Daisy washed dishes in hot water, marveling at the simple luxury of it. By the time she returned to her cabin, full dark had fallen. The fire had burned down to coals, and she built it back up, then changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. The mattress was softer than her old one, the blankets thick and warm. She could hear the wind outside, but it could not reach her here. For the first time in months, Daisy fell asleep without shivering, without fear, without the crushing weight of despair. The next morning, she woke to find frost on the window and sunlight streaming through the curtains. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main house, where she found Vincent already up stoking the fire. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a long time," Daisy admitted. "Thank you again for this opportunity, Mr. Sterling." "Vincent," he corrected gently. "And you do not need to keep thanking me. You are earning your keep." Over the next few weeks, Daisy settled into a routine. She rose early, prepared breakfast for Vincent and Tom, then spent her mornings cleaning the main house and doing laundry. Afternoons were for baking bread, preparing supper, and mending clothes. The work was hard, but it was satisfying, and she was warm and well-fed for the first time in months. In her free time, she visited Honey in the stable. The mare was thriving, with a warm stall and plenty of hay and grain. Daisy brushed her every day, talking to her softly, sometimes just resting her cheek against the mare's warm neck and breathing in her familiar scent. Vincent often joined her in the stable, checking on his other horses or doing small repairs. At first, they spoke only in polite pleasantries, but gradually, they began to have real conversations. Daisy learned that Vincent had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that he had left home at 16 after his parents died, that he had worked his way west doing every job imaginable. He had been a ranch hand, a trail cook, a horse breaker, a freight wagon driver. He had saved every penny, lived frugally, and finally had enough to buy his own land. "Why here?" Daisy asked one afternoon as they stood in the stable, watching Honey contentedly munch hay. "Why California?" "I wanted to go as far west as possible," Vincent said. "I wanted to leave behind everything I had known and start fresh. California seemed like the edge of the world, a place where anything was possible. And is it possible, I mean? Vincent looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she could not quite read. I think so. I have my own land, my own cattle. I am building something that will last. That is more than I ever thought I would have. Daisy understood that feeling. She was building something too, in her own way. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she had a purpose, a place where she belonged. As January turned to February, Daisy found herself thinking about Vincent more than she should. She noticed the way he always removed his hat when he spoke to her, the way he smiled when he tasted her cooking, the way he was endlessly patient with the animals. He was kind to Tom, fair in his dealings with neighbors, honest in his business. He was also handsome, though Daisy tried not to dwell on that. She noticed the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. She noticed how his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, how his voice dropped lower when he was tired, how he always made sure she had enough firewood without making a fuss about it. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that she was confusing appreciation for his kindness with something deeper. But as the weeks passed, she could not deny the way her heart beat faster when he came into a room, the way she found excuses to linger when they talked, the way she lay awake at night thinking about him. It was foolish. He was her employer and she was his housekeeper. There was a proper order to things, and she had no business entertaining romantic notions about a man who had only offered her employment out of compassion. But the heart, she was learning, did not always listen to reason. One evening in late February, a fierce storm rolled in. The wind howled around the buildings, and snow fell so thickly that Daisy could barely see the main house from her cabin window. She had just finished cleaning up after supper and was preparing to make her way back to her cabin when Vincent stopped her. "You should stay in the main house tonight," he said, frowning at the window. "It is too dangerous to go out in this. You could lose your way between here and your cabin." Daisy hesitated. "That would not be proper. Propriety is not worth freezing to death over. You can sleep in my room." "I will bunk with Tom in the spare room." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "I insist, Miss Fairmont. I will not have your death on my conscience." Tom nodded his agreement. "He is right, miss. This storm is a bad one. Best to stay where it is safe and warm." Reluctantly, Daisy agreed. Vincent showed her to his room, which was neat and spare, with a large bed covered in a thick quilt. He gathered some of his things and left her alone, closing the door firmly behind him. Daisy stood in the middle of the room, acutely aware that this was Vincent's private space, where he slept and dreamed. It felt intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. She noticed a book on the bedside table, a collection of Shakespeare's plays. She had not expected that, though she was not sure why. Vincent was clearly educated, despite his rough background. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into the bed, which smelled faintly of soap and leather and something that was uniquely Vincent. The storm raged outside, but she felt safe here, protected not just by walls but by something else, something she was not quite ready to name. The storm lasted 3 days. Daisy stayed in the main house, sleeping in Vincent's room while he and Tom shared the spare room. During the day, they all worked together, keeping the fire going, cooking, and trying to keep occupied while they waited for the weather to clear. It was during those 3 days that Daisy saw a different side of Vincent. He read aloud to them in the evenings, his deep voice bringing Shakespeare's words to life. He taught her a card game his mother had taught him. He told stories about his cattle drive days, making her and Tom laugh with his descriptions of mishaps and adventures. He also talked about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand, to build a legacy that would outlast him. And he asked Daisy about her dreams, her hopes for the future. "I have not thought much about the future," Daisy admitted as they sat by the fire on the second evening. Tom had already gone to bed, leaving them alone. "For so long I was just trying to survive. Dreams seemed like a luxury I could not afford." "But if you could afford them," Vincent pressed gently, "if you could have anything you wanted, what would it be?" Daisy thought about it, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "A home," she said finally. "Not just a place to live, but a real home. A place where I belong, where I am wanted, where I can build something that matters." "That does not seem like too much to ask," Vincent said quietly. "No. It has seemed impossible for a long time." Vincent was silent for a moment, then said, "You have a home here for as long as you want it. I hope you know that." Daisy looked at him and saw sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you, Vincent. That means more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Daisy was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight played across Vincent's features, how much she wanted to reach out and touch his hand. "May I ask you something personal?" Vincent said suddenly. "Of course." "Have you ever thought about marrying, starting a family of your own?" The question caught Daisy off guard. "Yes, I suppose I have, but it is not something that has seemed likely. My father scared off any young men who came around, and after he died, I was too busy trying to survive to think about courting." "That seems like a waste," Vincent said. "A woman like you should have a family, a husband who appreciates her." Daisy's heart was pounding. "A woman like me, kind, hard-working, beautiful." The last word hung in the air between them. Daisy stared at Vincent, hardly able to believe he had said it. "You think I am beautiful?" she whispered. Vincent's eyes met hers, and there was no mistaking the warmth in them. "I think you are the most beautiful woman I have ever known." Daisy could not breathe. She could not think. All she could do was look at Vincent and see the truth in his eyes, the same longing she felt reflected back at her. "Vincent, Before she could finish, he stood abruptly. "I apologize. That was inappropriate. You are in my employ, and I should not have spoken so freely. Please forget I said anything." He left the room quickly, leaving Daisy alone with her racing thoughts and pounding heart. She did not see much of Vincent over the next day. He was suddenly busy with chores that kept him outside, and when he came in for meals, he was polite but distant. Daisy wanted to talk to him, to tell him that she had not minded his words, that in fact, they had made her happier than she had been in years. But there was no opportunity, not with Tom always present. By the time the storm finally broke on the fourth day, Daisy was desperate to clear the air between them. She waited until Tom had gone out to check on the cattle, then approached Vincent as he was preparing to shovel snow from the porch. "Vincent, may I speak with you?" He turned, and she saw wariness in his expression. "Of course. About what you said the other night, I want you to know that I was not offended." "That is kind of you to say, but—" "I was not offended," Daisy interrupted, "because I feel the same way." Vincent went very still. "What?" Daisy took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I have tried not to feel this way. I know it is complicated, that I am in your employ, that there are propriety concerns. But I cannot help how I feel, Vincent. You have been kind to me when I had nothing. You gave me a home when I was freezing and starving. You brought me back to Honey when I thought I had lost her forever. How could I not care for you, Daisy?" He said her name like a prayer, and suddenly he was crossing the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face. "I have been fighting this since the day I met you. Since I saw you crying in that livery stable, saying goodbye to your horse. I knew then that I could not just walk away, that I had to help you somehow. And then you came here and you made my house into a home, and every day I fall a little more in love with you." "You love me," Daisy breathed. "God help me, I do." His thumb brushed her cheek and Daisy leaned into the touch. "But I do not want you to feel obligated. If you care for me only out of gratitude." "It is not gratitude," Daisy said firmly. "It is love, Vincent. I love you." The words had barely left her lips before he was kissing her, a gentle, reverent kiss that made Daisy's toes curl. She had been kissed before, clumsy, stolen kisses from awkward suitors, but nothing like this. This was a kiss that spoke of longing and tenderness and promises yet to be made. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I want to do this right," Vincent said. "I want to court you properly with chaperones and respect. I want people to know that you are not just my housekeeper but the woman I intend to marry if you will have me." "Marry?" Daisy's head was spinning. "Not right away," Vincent said quickly. "We can take our time, get to know each other better. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable, Daisy. I am not the kind of man who plays with a woman's affections." "I know that," Daisy said, and she did. Vincent Sterling was the most honorable man she had ever known. "And yes, I would like that very much." They stood on the porch, hands clasped, smiling at each other like fools until Tom's voice calling from the barn broke the spell. "I should help him," Vincent said reluctantly. "And I should start dinner," Daisy replied. But neither of them moved for a long moment, neither wanting to break the perfect happiness of the moment. Over the following weeks, Vincent courted Daisy with old-fashioned gentleness. He brought her wildflowers that he found on his rides. He read poetry to her in the evenings. He took her riding on Honey, the two of them exploring the ranch together, always with Tom somewhere in sight to maintain propriety. He also made sure the neighboring ranchers knew that Daisy was not just an employee but someone special to him. When they attended church in the nearby settlement, he sat beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers. When neighbors visited, he introduced her as his intended, and Daisy saw the approval in most of their eyes. There were a few raised eyebrows, a few whispered comments about the speed of their courtship, but mostly people seemed happy for them. Vincent was well liked and respected, and Daisy's story had spread through the community. Everyone knew she had been forced to sell her beloved horse to survive, and they approved of Vincent's kindness in hiring her and courting her. In March, the weather began to warm. The snow melted, revealing green grass beneath, and wildflowers started to bloom across the hills. Calves were born, wobbly-legged and curious, and Daisy spent hours watching them play while she hung laundry or worked in the garden she had started behind her cabin. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vincent took her hand. "Daisy, I know we have only been courting for a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you and I want to spend the rest of my days with you. Will you marry me?" Daisy felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, Vincent. Yes, I will marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "It is all I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." Daisy held out her hand and Vincent slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Not as beautiful as you." They married in April in the small church near the settlement. Tom stood as Vincent's best man, and one of the neighbor women, Sarah Mitchell, stood with Daisy. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Daisy wore a dress that Sarah had helped her make, a soft blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Vincent wore his best suit, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, the look on his face made Daisy's heart overflow. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her gently, and the small congregation cheered. The reception was held at the Sterling Ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and good wishes. They danced in the barn, which Tom had swept clean and decorated with wildflowers. Vincent held Daisy close as they swayed to the music, and she felt like she was floating. Happy. He murmured against her hair. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied. That night, after the guests had left and Tom had discreetly retired to the bunkhouse, Vincent carried Daisy over the threshold of the main house. He had moved all her things from the cabin into his room, which was now their room, their sanctuary. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Daisy Sterling. I love you too, Vincent. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Vincent taking his time to show Daisy how much he cherished her. She had been nervous, uncertain, but Vincent was patient and gentle, making sure she felt loved and safe. When they finally came together, it was perfect, a joining not just of bodies but of souls. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Daisy's head on Vincent's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I still cannot believe this is real, she whispered. 6 months ago, I was freezing and alone, selling my horse just to survive. Now I am married to the most wonderful man in the world, and Honey is in the stable just outside. Believe it, Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. This is real and it is forever. I promise you that. Life on the Sterling ranch settled into a new rhythm. Daisy was no longer just the housekeeper, but the mistress of the house, Vincent's wife and partner. She still cooked and cleaned, but now she also helped with the ranch accounts, made decisions about household matters, and gradually became involved in every aspect of the operation. Tom became like family, a beloved older brother who teased them mercilessly, but was clearly delighted by their happiness. He took over some of Daisy's former chores, insisting that she should not work herself to exhaustion now that she was the boss's wife. As spring turned to summer, the ranch prospered. The cattle thrived, new foals were born, and Vincent's reputation as a fair and honest rancher grew. He hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding herd, young men who respected Daisy and treated her with the courtesy due the rancher's wife. Daisy had never been happier. She woke each morning to Vincent's kisses, spent her days doing work she loved, and fell asleep each night in the arms of the man she adored. She rode Honey nearly every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with Vincent, exploring the land that was now her home. In late summer, Daisy realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she wanted to be certain before she told Vincent. When the doctor in Nevada City confirmed it, she rode home in a daze, hardly able to contain her joy. She told Vincent that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then pure, radiant joy. A baby, he said, his voice cracking. We are going to have a baby. Yes, Daisy said, laughing and crying at the same time. In early spring, the doctor thinks. Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I am going to be a father, he whispered against her hair. I am going to be a father. When he finally released her, there were tears on his cheeks. I never thought I would have this, he said. A wife, a family, a home. I thought I would spend my life alone, building something that would die with me. But now you have everything, Daisy finished, wiping the tears from his face. We have everything. The months of Daisy's pregnancy were filled with preparation and anticipation. Vincent became ridiculously protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. He built a beautiful cradle in the barn, spending hours sanding and polishing the wood until it was perfectly smooth. Daisy sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not yet met. The neighbor women rallied around her, offering advice and support. Sarah Mitchell became a close friend, visiting often and helping Daisy prepare for the baby's arrival. It was a different kind of happiness than Daisy had known before, a sense of belonging not just to Vincent but to a whole community. Winter came again, but this time Daisy did not fear it. She was warm and safe in the solid house Vincent had built, with a husband who adored her and a child growing inside her. When the first snow fell, she stood at the window with Vincent's arms around her, marveling at how different her life was from the previous winter. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked. "I am thinking about how much can change in a year," Daisy said. "Last winter I was alone and terrified, selling honey just to survive. Now I am here with you, carrying our child, surrounded by everything I could ever want." "It is a miracle," Vincent agreed. "And I thank God for it every day." Their son was born on a cold March morning, arriving after a long but relatively easy labor. Vincent paced outside the bedroom while Sarah and the doctor attended to Daisy, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into tears. When Sarah finally let him in, he found Daisy propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with so much love that it made his heart ache. "Meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already trying to focus his eyes on his father. "He is perfect," Vincent breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Daisy asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Vincent knew exactly what felt right. "James," he said. "After your father, James Samuel Sterling." Daisy's eyes filled with tears. "You would name him after my father. Your father gave me the greatest gift of my life when he gave you honey," Vincent said. "If he had not done that, you would not have had to sell her, and I would never have met you. It seems right to honor his memory." They named their son James Samuel Sterling, and he was baptized in the same church where his parents had been married. Tom became his godfather, accepting the responsibility with gruff emotion. The whole community celebrated, bringing gifts and good wishes, and Daisy felt her heart might burst with happiness. James was a healthy, happy baby, and as he grew, Daisy could see both herself and Vincent in his features. He had Vincent's dark hair and strong chin, but Daisy's blue eyes and quick smile. He was the perfect blend of both of them, a living symbol of their love. The years passed in a blur of happiness. The ranch continued to prosper, growing larger and more successful. Vincent hired more hands, built more buildings, expanded into horse breeding. He and Daisy became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and fairness. When James was 3, Daisy gave birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Grace. They had their mother's blonde hair and their father's gray eyes, and they wrapped both their parents and big brother around their tiny fingers from the moment they were born. The house that had once been too quiet was now filled with laughter and noise, and the chaos of a growing family. Daisy could hardly remember the lonely, desperate woman she had been that winter in Nevada City. That life seemed like a distant dream, belonging to someone else entirely. Honey lived to the grand old age of 28, dying peacefully in her sleep in the stable Vincent had built for her. Daisy cried when they buried her in a sunny pasture, but they were tears of gratitude as much as grief. Honey had been the instrument of her salvation, the reason she had met Vincent, the link that had brought her to this life she loved. Vincent held her as she cried, understanding her grief because he had loved Honey too. "She brought us together," he said quietly. "I will always be grateful to her for that." By the time Daisy and Vincent celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, they had 5 children: James, now 11 and already showing promise as a rancher. The twins Elizabeth and Grace, who were 8 and full of mischief. 6-year-old Robert, who was quiet and thoughtful, and baby Catherine, who had arrived the previous spring. They celebrated with a party that brought together everyone they loved. Tom, now graying and slowing down but still an integral part of the ranch, gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. The neighbors, who had become their dearest friends, raised their glasses in celebration. The children ran wild, playing games and eating too much cake. That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Daisy and Vincent sat on the porch as they had done so many times before. The stars were bright overhead, and a warm breeze carried the scent of summer grass. 10 years, Daisy said, leaning her head on Vincent's shoulder. It seems impossible that it has been that long, and also like we have been together forever, Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her hair. I cannot remember a time when you were not part of my life. Do you ever regret it? Taking in that desperate woman from Nevada City, Vincent turned to face her, his expression serious. Daisy Sterling, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Marrying you was the smartest thing I have ever done. Every day with you has been a gift. I have never regretted it for a single moment. I love you, Daisy said, her voice thick with emotion. I love you too. Always have, always will. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch. Inside, their children slept safely. In the barn, horses shifted in their stalls. In the distance, cattle grazed in moonlit pastures. This was home. This was family. This was everything Daisy had ever dreamed of and more than she had ever dared to hope for. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing children. James grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Vincent slowed down. The twins became beautiful, spirited young women who attracted suitors from across the county. Robert found his passion in breeding horses, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest animals in California. Catherine, the baby, grew up surrounded by love and laughter, the darling of the entire family. Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 68, and the entire community mourned him. He was buried on the ranch, in a spot overlooking the valley he had loved. Vincent grieved his friend and partner deeply, but he took comfort in knowing that Tom had lived his last years surrounded by the family he had helped build. As Daisy and Vincent grew older, they spent more time on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. James married a sweet girl from Nevada City and gave them 3 grandchildren. Elizabeth married a neighboring rancher and had 4 children of her own. Grace chose to remain single, helping her father run the ranch with efficiency and skill. Robert married late and had 2 children, both boys who shared his love of horses. Catherine married young and moved to San Francisco with her husband, but she visited often with her growing family. On their 30th anniversary, Daisy and Vincent renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the community they had helped build. Daisy wore a new dress, but Vincent wore the same suit he had worn 30 years before, carefully preserved and still fitting him well. When the preacher asked them to repeat their vows, Daisy found herself crying, overwhelmed by the fullness of her life. She looked at Vincent, his hair now silver, his face lined with years of hard work and laughter, and she thought he had never been more handsome. "I love you," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I loved you when I was young and desperate. I loved you when we were building our life together. I love you now, after 30 years of marriage, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Vincent's own eyes were bright with tears. "You saved me, Daisy. You made my house a home, my life worth living. Everything good in my life has come from loving you. I promise to cherish you for whatever time we have left, and to be grateful every day for the gift of your love." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the celebration that followed lasted well into the night. 10 years later, Vincent developed a cough that would not go away. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and did what he could, but Vincent's lungs had been weakened by years of dust and hard work. He lingered for a few weeks, surrounded by family, before passing away peacefully in his sleep with Daisy holding his hand. Daisy grieved deeply, but she did not despair. She had had 40 beautiful years with the man she loved, had built a family and a legacy that would continue long after they were both gone. She found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the ranch that thrived under James and Grace's management, in the memories of a life well lived. She lived another 5 years, growing frailer but never losing her sharp mind or loving heart. She spent her days in the rocking chair on the porch, watching her great-grandchildren play, telling them stories about their grandfather and the ranch in the old days. On a warm spring morning, she asked to be taken to the pasture where Honey was buried. Her children carried her there in a chair, and she sat for a long time, her hand resting on the weathered marker. "Thank you, girl," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing me to him. Thank you for everything." That night, Daisy Sterling passed away in her sleep, a smile on her face, dreaming of a golden mare and a gray-eyed cowboy who had saved her from the cold. They buried her next to Vincent, on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire community came to pay their respects, but it was not a sad occasion. It was a celebration of a life filled with love, of a woman who had started with nothing and built everything. Years later, the Sterling Ranch was still thriving, passed down through the generations. The story of Daisy and Vincent became family legend, told to each new generation of children. They spoke of how their great-great-grandmother had been forced to sell her beloved horse to survive a brutal winter, and how their great-great-grandfather had bought the horse and brought them both to the ranch, where a love story for the ages had begun. The old house still stood, carefully maintained, filled with the echoes of laughter and love. On the porch, where Daisy and Vincent had sat so many evenings, their great-great-grandchildren would sit and watch the sunset, feeling the presence of the two people who had started it all. And in the stable, among the fine horses that bore the Sterling name, there was always at least one Palomino mare, golden as honey, a living reminder of the horse that had changed everything. The love between Daisy Fairmont and Vincent Sterling had transcended death, living on in the land they had worked, the family they had raised, and the legacy they had built together. It was a love born from desperation and kindness, nurtured by respect and tenderness, and strengthened by years of partnership and devotion. It was a love that had started with a desperate woman and a compassionate cowboy, a golden horse and a brutal winter, and it had grown into something eternal, something that would never be forgotten as long as the Sterling Ranch stood and the story was told. And it was, perhaps, the greatest love story the Wild West had ever known.